Welcome to Live Well, Dream Big. I'm Suzanne Monroe, founder of the International Association of Wellness Professionals, where I've been teaching people how to live a life of wellness, tap into their passion, and go for their dreams for over 15 years. I believe living well and dreaming big starts with ourselves. This podcast will show you how to create a healthy, holistic life, empower your mindset, follow your dreams, and make a big impact. Let's dive in right now. Do you feel burned out, tired, or even just lacking a sense of energy every day? Or maybe you just don't feel completely like yourself? I've felt that way before, and I thought it was just me until I decided to look into it. I knew there had to be another way and that I could feel really great every day. And that's when I found functional medicine, and I learned that there were certain glands and hormones in our bodies that actually impact how we feel every day. And my test results showed that there was something a little off. But the good news was there was something I could do about it. Now, today I feel great thanks to my own personal functional medicine doctor, Dr. Tiffany Mullen, who I'm having a conversation with during today's episode. So if you feel like I used to, or if you're looking for a doctor who takes a more personal, holistic, integrative approach, then I invite you to listen into today's episode as we talk about the hormone dance, including what exactly functional medicine has to do with it and how we can feel our best every day. So let's get started. Welcome. Today we're talking about the hormone dance, and I'm very excited to be joined by a special guest, Dr. Tiffany Mullen. Dr. Tiffany Mullen is the CEO and co-founder of Vytal Health, a Milwaukee, Wisconsin-based telemedicine startup company. And years after feeling frustrated by healthcare, both as a patient and a physician, Dr. Mullen left corporate healthcare behind to co-found Vytal Health. Vytal Health is a membership-based telemedicine company focusing on helping patients to solve health problems that have been really overlooked or undertreated by traditional healthcare. And prior to launching Vytal Health, Dr. Mullen led Aurora Healthcare in Milwaukee's Department of Integrative Medicine as its medical director, growing it to the largest department in the country. She is duly board certified in family and integrative medicine, and she completed her family medicine residency at St. Joseph's Hospital and Medical Center in Phoenix, Arizona, and her fellowship in integrative medicine at the University of Arizona in Tucson. Additionally, Dr. Mullen is extensively trained in functional medicine through the Institute for Functional Medicine. And Dr. Mullen is my very personal own functional medicine doctor. Yay. Welcome, Dr. Mullen.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm thrilled you're joining our community today. And of course, it makes it extra special that you're my physician. And I really wanted to bring you on to Live Well, Dream Big, just because I think you have something really special to share with the work that you do. I know for myself, I've experienced so many life-changing results working with you and learning all about my own hormones, my thyroid, my adrenals, and how these things are all connected to our health, our mood, our energy, and so much more. And yet for some reason, most doctors really aren't talking about these things with their patients. So I'm glad we're having this conversation today. And before we get into hormones specifically, let's just start out, Dr. Mullen, by talking a little bit about what functional medicine is, because maybe not everybody knows. And just so we're all kind of on the same page and kind of have a good understanding of the approach that you take when it comes to health and wellness, and what is functional medicine exactly?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of people don't know what functional medicine is. And there's so many flavors of when we talk about holistic medicine, sort of the umbrella of holistic medicine. You have words like functional medicine, integrative medicine, naturopathic medicine, all of these terms that do have some commonalities and are all under that same kind of umbrella. But I think the way that I think about functional medicine is that it is an approach to healthcare, approach to medicine that involves solving a problem or attempting to solve a problem, if possible, through identifying the root cause. And the difference between traditional medicine, where I'm a trained physician in traditional medicine, and functional medicine is that in traditional medicine, we tend to do this thing, what I call name it, tame it, and blame it. Basically, what we're doing is we're listening to symptoms. We are identifying a name for it. And then essentially we're providing prescriptions mostly to treat symptoms. And in functional medicine, what we're doing is we are identifying the root cause of the problem through a process called systems biology. And systems biology approach is taking into consideration all aspects of a human being. So this is where it gets really holistic, whether you say like holistic with a W or holistic with an H. You're looking at a person's lifestyle, genetics, environmental conditions, their timeline from birth until present time, all of the systems in their body, not just one isolated system, not just the digestive system, not just the nervous system, but how all of these things play into the development of a problem, and then treating that issue at the root instead of covering it with prescriptions. So that was kind of a long explanation, but I hope the contrast between the traditional approach and the functional approach is pretty apparent.
Well, that makes total sense, and I think you're really speaking our language here, because this idea of getting to the root of the problems really is this holistic perspective, right?
Exactly.
And it's so important because there's so many things that affect our health and wellness.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious though, how did you? Because we kind of heard a little bit about your journey there. How did you go from being in the traditional world to getting started in functional medicine? Like, what happened, and why did you make that switch?
Well, I think I feel like I always was a holistic physician from the very beginning. So my journey to becoming a physician really began when I was 1.5 years old. When I was hitting the medical textbooks. No, I'm kidding. When I was a little kid, I was sick. I got a really weird medical problem that nobody could solve. It took 6 months, and I was, quite ill, spiking fevers, rashes, very, very swollen joints. They thought I had rheumatic fever. They threw penicillin after penicillin after penicillin at me, and I didn't get better. And after 6 months, I was finally taken. I was in a small town in Southern Illinois. I was finally taken to Children's Hospital in St. Louis, Missouri, and diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, which is a pretty rare form of autoimmune arthritis in kids. And it is chronic. It is probably genetic. We don't exactly know. But it shaped my entire life. I have been a patient. I have touched all aspects of the healthcare system before the healthcare system was even a healthcare system. And it was ultimately that which led me to want to be a physician. So when I decided to become a doctor, I was putting into place all of the things that I myself did to help myself be functional. And so part of that was getting my sleep to the best of my ability, managing my stress, even though that was really difficult in medical school, eating a certain way, eating healthfully, exercising regularly, and taking the appropriate supplements. So even though I couldn't solve my problem, I did better and am quite functional, despite the fact that I've had this illness now for 52 years. You would hardly ever know it unless you looked at my x-rays and you'd be like, oh my gosh, there's more metal in this woman than there is anything else. But I was able to actually move forward because of that holistic approach. And when I decided to go to medical school, that was when Andrew Weil, the sort of grandfather of integrative medicine, was just coming onto the scene. Mm-hmm. His books were becoming popular, and I was just gobbling up his stuff. I was gobbling up Deepak Chopra, Bernie Siegel, all of these really important early thinkers about how holistic medicine could be blended with traditional medicine. And it was my goal, therefore, from the very beginning, to say, like, I think all of these things are important, and they all should be brought to the patient's the patient's experience, so that they can choose the tools that they want to use and the approaches that they want to use in their care.
Well, thanks for sharing your story there, because I think it's so interesting, right? Because no matter what kind of path you end up taking, even for the coaches in our community, and oftentimes many of our listeners, is like, there's something that happens in your own life, either your own health or maybe a close family member, that you go through something and it kind of ignites this spark. Like, okay, first of all, I got to figure out how to solve this because I'm not getting the answers. And number two, you're like, oh, there is a better way. There is a different view. And then it kind of starts this passion in you to share it with others. So
totally. Yeah. And then being a physician on the other side, once I got onto the other side of it, and I had so many experiences being very cruelly treated by physicians as a patient. And so, I went off to medical school, like, I'm going to show you. Like, I was like, gung ho on saying, like, okay, I can be a better doctor than some of the doctors I experienced. I had great doctors too in the mix, but when I got to the other side, I began to understand, like, oh, okay, this is a really hard thing to do too. Like, these doctors are also in pain, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and they need healing too. Like, there's a hurt in the medical professional as well. So I think it was realizing that both sides of the equation needed love and support and better answers and better approaches, that I think ultimately was kind of where I ended up where I am today.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, so doctors are in pain and hurt too. I mean, their schedules are so crazy. They're taking on so much. And when we talk about functional medicine, I mean, it seems to kind of go beyond what most traditional doctors are focusing on. Is it because they're in this pain? Is it because they don't have time? What are your thoughts? Why aren't other doctors kind of taking this broader functional approach at this point?
Yes, and yes, and yes.
Yeah.
So first of all, it's not taught. When I was in medical school, I think I may have received an hour of nutrition, maybe. And I'm really kind of stretching that because I had to pull a little bit out of biochemistry and a little bit of physiology. But by the time it was all said and done, I probably had an hour. Managing hormones is not taught. We learn about them, but we don't really learn about how they intermix with one another. And that's one of the things that we'll be talking about today. So it is an educational barrier. But then it's also the fact that the system stacked against physicians in terms of the transactional nature of the 10 to 15-minute office visit that gets in the way of really being able to deeply explore problems and understand them in the context of somebody's life. You just can't do that in 10 to 15 minutes. You can do a sore throat, you can do a sinus infection, you can do a simple problem, a simple primary care problem, but you really can't solve some of the things. And a lot of what people are dealing with are things like stress and sleep and hormone problems and all kinds of things that just don't lend themselves to that model. So the physician's hands are tied trying to manage those problems and be able to get through their day. So it's a whole host of barriers, I think, that come together to make it difficult.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things going on in the mix when you talk about that, and I got to say, just personally, I know since I began working with you, I've also had a lot of friends and family members suddenly start talking to me. It's like when you're driving down the road and you want to buy a car and then you just start seeing that car. It's kind of the same
observational
thing.
bias.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like all of a sudden people are talking to me about their hormone challenges, their energy challenges, or things that they just really can't explain. And when they mention this, I've sent many people your way because of the help that you've provided me. But tell us a little bit about what functional medicine in terms of what it is in terms of should everybody be looking into working with a functional medicine doctor? I mean, is it for everyone or is it only if you're having certain challenges that you're noticing coming up?
I mean, that's a great question. I think, my knee-jerk reaction to that question is say, everyone should have a functional medicine doctor. And it's not that we're all dealing with, complex medical problems or time-consuming or deep medical problems. But I think having a physician, regardless of whether they're coming at this from a functional medicine perspective, integrative medicine, naturopathic medicine, having a physician that's open to your value system, regardless of what you're bringing to the table in terms of a problem, I think is really, really great. And so when I was practicing primary care and I had my integrative tool bag and I had my functional tool bag and I had things to offer, if somebody came to me and said, I'm having heartburn, I could say, well, okay, here's, 5 or 6 options. Anything from, hey, let's treat this with an H2 blocker. Let's, work on your diet. Let's use ginger, so let's use acupuncture. There were lots of options. And I think that that's really the most important thing is just to be able to say, like, what do you want for your own care? And find somebody who can provide you with options and teach you about your problem. Because I think that's the other thing is the root word for doctor is docere, which is to teach. And we're supposed to be teaching our patients about their health and how they can be healthier. That's really what medicine was intended to do. So not giving them the opportunity to understand things in depth and really be able to participate and collaborate in their care, I think is what's missing from healthcare.
Mm-hmm. Docere, teach. I like
Docere,
that. But I like how you also mentioned, hey, it's kind of what is your journey? Like this isn't just on physicians. It's also as you as the patient, right? You have to empower yourself and be interested in learning more instead of just, you don't want to look that far into things or you just give me the thing. So there's this kind of dynamic, right? Where we have a dynamic.
Yeah, that conversation. And I want people to hear me. This is not a trashing of traditional healthcare. This is not a throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I have been the recipient of incredible interventions in traditional healthcare. I've had orthopedic surgeries. I've had drugs that have helped my rheumatoid arthritis. So this is not anti-traditional healthcare. This is just understanding that there are limitations to that method and that we should be able to enhance that and add to it, not necessarily like take it out of the picture.
Yeah, I love that. And I have to say, I've been in the holistic health and wellness field for almost 2 decades now. And it was kind of funny because I personally didn't really think that much about, my adrenals, my thyroids, my hormones, because I didn't have any reason to. There were no real symptoms coming up. But then after the birth of my son and after having kind of a year of sleepless nights, taking care of him, I think my adrenals were shot and I realized, okay, I just don't have that same level of energy I used to. And still, I didn't really think about it that much. But then I remembered some of the curriculum in our program here at the IAWP. And I thought, hey, maybe I need to take my own advice, or at least the advice of our faculty, and look a little closer at myself. So for me, when I first sought out functional medicine and more of this integrative approach, it was just because I simply didn't have as much energy as I used to. And something just sort of fell off. What would you say are some of the signs and symptoms that someone might have that would indicate, okay, they should look into this or look at a bigger picture holistically or functionally? Something might be going on with hormones, adrenals, thyroid.
Yeah, there's nothing like a 10-minute office visit when you come into that doctor's office and say, I just feel off. Yeah. if you want to see a traditional physician light on fire, just go in there and say, I just feel a little off, because it's just, it could go in 15 million directions, right? But so from a perspective of, and I would say, Suzanne, you are sort of the quintessential superwoman, right? We go like, and I am too, we go years feeling crappy before we actually ask for help, which is, a problem, right? We all need to say like, maybe if I feel off for a shorter amount of time, I should ask for help. But so, I mean, I think asking for help when you start to notice things about yourself, like I'm tired when I shouldn't be tired. Like I've been sleeping 7 to 8 hours, 10 hours, 9 hours, 8 hours, and I still don't feel well. I'm trying to do my exercise and it's just not working for me. The hormonal stuff like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, may be a little bit easier to understand. My periods are off. I'm having night sweats or hot flashes. My hair is changing. My libido is down. I have vaginal pain with intercourse. I just don't have the stamina that I used to have. I think those are maybe a little bit more obvious sometimes to us, but the adrenal ones and the thyroid ones, the sluggishness, like I'm gaining weight and all of a sudden I have a poochy belly and what the heck, I'm supposed to be eating well, I'm eating good stuff. And I still have this weird like thing in the middle of my belly that wasn't there before. And, so it's all these kind of strange transformational symptoms, I think, that point towards a potential hormonal cause.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Like, oh, I just feel off, but what you're saying is, it's almost a sense of, hey, I'm doing everything right, but it's still things are looking or feeling.
Yeah, I still don't feel good. Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's kind of get into it. Let's talk hormones, because it seems like something we should have learned about in school, at least to better understand ourselves. And maybe we got a quick overview, but we just sort of dismissed it and never thought about it again. But obviously our hormones, they can rule our daily life, because for me,
they do.
I mean, my energy was off, right? I thought, oh, maybe my adrenals are shot. That's kind of a buzzword these days, but I had plenty of sleepless nights taking care of a baby at that time, kind of burning the candle at both ends. And, maybe there's a quick fix. I said, take some supplements or what I should do, but the hormones are at play in all of this, right? I mean, talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, so I think what we forget about, and this is just like a basic principle, hormones are messenger molecules. That's their job. So their job is to talk. Their job is to talk to the body, in other words, land in receptors and carry out biological processes and intermix with each other, influence all of the other parts of the way that hormones work. That is their job. And as somebody who's a talker, I can tell you that, if you tried to silence me, I probably would drive you crazy, because it's not what they're meant to do. They're supposed to be out there doing their job. When you get into trouble with hormones is really when things start to become problematic. And our pace and our culture and the way that we interact with the world, burning the candle on both ends, just having so much input into our lives with digital and with, all of the things that ping and ding and go off all day long, the draw on our attention from our work to our children, to our pets, everything that's in our life, all really draw on that. Not to mention the fact that in the environment, there are tons of chemicals that disrupt the endocrine system. So there are things that actually cause problems, cause biological processes to break down. And that's more true of younger people who are still in the fertility range than older people, but still we're up against a lot of these challenges. We've already talked about the symptom sort of the symptom perspective of how these things show up. I wonder if this is a good time to share the handout. Does this seem like a good time, Suzanne,
Yeah,
in
let's
the whole
definitely do
scope?
it.
You
Yep.
want me to share my screen?
Sure. Why don't you go ahead, give it a try?
Okay.
If you can't do it, I can do it as well.
All right. So this is the handout that the PDF that I shared. Yep, it looks like it's going to let me share. That gives you a sense of what's happening in the interplay between the main endocrine organs. And when I say the main endocrine organs, I'm talking about the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, which are right here in the brain, right? So if you cut the brain in half, right in the middle are these two very important glands, which we refer to as sort of the master glands. And it's interesting to think about, like, right here is where the eye is, right? Right here in the front. So the eye is letting in light, letting in information, taking in data from the world. And the ear is right next to that as well. So there's these sort of data points or entry of information that's happening. And that's part of how our stress system works, right? We have information coming in through our eyes, information coming in through our ears. There's a strong connection between these two glands and a structure right behind called the limbic system, which is the emotional layer of the brain. So we store memories in that emotional layer of the brain. And that is a really important way that we learn how to take in our environment and sort of deal with the things around us. It's only when those things start to break down, to your point, Suzanne, where you said, I was taking care of my kids and going about my business, and all of a sudden everything started to go off the rails. It's only when things start to break down that we notice the distinct impact that these hormones have on our system. So hypothalamus triggers pituitary, and then pituitary tells everything else what to do. So the pituitary has a connection to the adrenal gland, this little snow cap sitting on top of your kidney, which is a really important gland in not just the stress response, producing things like adrenaline and noradrenaline, our fight or flight molecules, but also cortisol, our chronic stress hormone. And people tend to think of cortisol as a bad thing, but I'll explain in a moment why it's not. It also produces hormones. It produces some sex hormones, so estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and it produces hormones that are involved in our fluid balance, our blood pressure, our vascular tone, whether we keep fluid, get rid of sodium. All of those things are related to the adrenal gland function. So there's a lot of tie-ins. So the pituitary secretes this ACTH, which stimulates adrenal gland, and then the adrenal gland releases cortisol. And then there's this feedback mechanism that's happening. And this is true of all hormones. They feed back on the pituitary, and there's a conversation that's happening all the time between these glands and all the glands out in the periphery, where they're talking back and forth to each other and feeding back on one another, saying, I want more, I want less, give me more, give me less, so that there's sort of dynamic environment that's happening all the time in the body. So if you can think about the fact that in a stress response, you're constantly pulling on your adrenal glands and saying, make more, make more, make more, that at some point that conversation may break down, right? There may be a distinct shutdown of, like, just a non-responsiveness of the pituitary gland. Like, okay, you are flooding me with cortisol. Please stop. I cannot manage any more of this. And so when we talk about adrenal fatigue, we're really talking about a breakdown between the HPA axis, hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and the body. So there's a breakdown. We call that HPA dysfunction. That's what we think adrenal fatigue really is. Now, cortisol has gotten a bad rap. Cortisol is actually a very important hormone in the body. Its job is actually as an anti-inflammatory. So if you can think about a fight or flight response, let's say, a tiger chases you and you manage to get away from running because your adrenaline is like coursing through your body. But that tiger actually gets its last little claw on you as you manage to turn the corner and cuts open your skin. The adrenal gland also releases cortisol, because cortisol is going to jump in and heal the wound and decrease the inflammation and control that problem. So it is by design an anti-inflammatory hormone, and we need it. So I want people to understand that it is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. It's only a problem when it's around too much and being, the elevation of it or the complete depletion of it, where we get the imbalance of cortisol, that things tend to go awry. So I hope all of that makes sense. That was kind of the primer on the stress response and how it actually looks physiologically. down in the sort of ovary department, and you could substitute the testes and testosterone, sort of a similar thing. The only difference being that the connection between the pituitary and the testosterone response is really just LH. There's no FSH response truly in the male, but the FSH and LH are the drivers to ovulation. That happens down in the ovary. Obviously, they produce estrogen and progesterone in women. That feeds back up on the pituitary. And again, there's this conversation that's happening. We want ovulation to occur. There's fluctuations that happen. And then over in the thyroid realm, TSH, probably people are familiar with thyroid stimulating hormone. That's released by the pituitary, goes down to the thyroid, and then flips back into T3 and T4. And again, conversation. Now, what people don't think about is the fact that there's all this communication between the adrenals and the thyroid and the ovaries and the ovaries and the adrenals. And all of these things out in the body are communicating with each other. They're communicating with the heart. They're communicating with the gut. They're communicating with the nervous system. And they exert their mechanism on one another through various ways. They can actually compete for receptor binding. They can lower sex binding globulin hormone, which is the protein that actually carries and transports all these hormones through the blood system, because they're essentially fats. And if they didn't attach to a protein, they would sort of settle out like oil and water, if you think about that in the vascular system. So it's that conversation that's happening between the hormones. So you can easily see like how stress shuts down periods and how hypothyroidism impacts the menstrual cycle, right? So there's definitely that connection. And I think this is the opportunity that's missed by the traditional medical community, because we get in our silos and the gynecologists are all about the ovaries. Nobody's thinking about the adrenal glands. That's like no man's land. And then the thyroid, it's like, oh, the endocrinologists are all about the thyroid, but they don't think about these other things. So this is just basic physiology. And I think we forget about this in practice, that, yeah, these things are messenger molecules and they're critically important to each other's function.
Well, it's so interesting just seeing this. And I want to mention, for anyone who's listening to the podcast, we have the link to this in the show notes. So you can grab that after you listen to the podcast or during the podcast. And I'll say this is really interesting to kind of get this overview. I feel like, okay, I'm geeking out a little bit.
Totally.
And then I'm nodding my head, but I'm like, wait, I really don't know what she's saying. But it helps to give this. And one thing that stuck out, I was like, okay, there's this conversation that's happening. We can get stuck in our silos, like with anything, but I love again, it brings it back to that holistic approach. How are all these things talking together, right?
Yeah. And there's so many layers. I mean, this is where I can be nerdy to the point of like annoying, but there's so many layers about like how your genetics impact this, how your autoimmunity impacts this, how your gut impacts the health of these organs and these organs impacting the gut, how neurotransmitters are in the mix, things like serotonin and dopamine and all these things. So thinking about it in that physiology of all of these things being present and being able to understand when you're listening to somebody, okay, I see where this conversation is breaking down or maybe breaking down. And then we can measure it and see whether that's true or not.
Well, this is interesting. I know for many of our live listeners right now, they're posting in the chat. That's amazing. They're nodding their heads. Some of them are like, hey, this sounds like me. What are some of the signs and symptoms that maybe your hormones, adrenals, thyroid, this interconnection, something needs attention? I know I shared a little bit about some of the things I was experiencing. Are there any these are the markers or these are the things that you should look further?
Yeah, I think there's some. So if I think about the adrenal glands specifically, because I think that is probably the area where in traditional medicine, if you go to your family physician, this is when I say no man's land, I mean, literally like people just don't understand the adrenal function and how cortisol manifests in the body. The only thing that they understand is when you have complete adrenal shutdown, which is Addison's disease, or complete overactiveness of the adrenal glands, which is Cushing's disease. But there's this gray area in the middle where traditional medicine, endocrinology, people in the healthcare system just don't understand that HPA axis dysregulation piece. So some of the classic symptoms that I see that are related to the adrenals are feeling tired and wired. So the person who is going to bed at 9, 10 o'clock and is exhausted as heck. I mean, like they are just like crawling to the bed and then they're laying in the bed with their eyes wide open. So they're like, I'm so tired, but I can't sleep. That is a classic adrenal symptom. The other one is waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and can't get back to sleep. That is the other one that just goes ding, 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 ding for me, because what's happening at 3 a.m. is your diurnal cortisol rhythm is happening. You're spiking your cortisol from 3 a.m. to about 7, 8 in the morning is when cortisol rapidly rises. So people who are sensitive to their cortisol at 3 a.m. will just snap awake and their eyeballs will just pop open. Sometimes they'll actually be in sort of a fight or flight, like they're heart will be pounding and they'll be like, why did I just have a bad dream? Like what happened? Where they're just a surge of cortisol that's coming out of them. So those are two classic. When somebody tells me those two stories, and you'd be surprised how often that actually people literally say those words, I'm like, okay, that's adrenals. Unexplained weight gain, especially around the middle of the body, because that is where cortisol likes to lay down protective fat. Cortisol is saying, hey, if you're going to run from tigers all day long, I better give you some extra fuel to have in case you actually, don't make it. You have to go another 10 miles. I'm going to give you some extra stuff. And that's evolutionarily protective to put it around your organs so they're protected, right? So that middle of the body weight gain. And then just an inexplicable fatigue. The fatigue that is just like, this is like next level fatigue. And I feel physically tired. I feel mentally tired. My brain is foggy. I forget stuff. This isn't me. Like, I'm not this person. That is another really classic symptom. The thyroid stuff is, all of that plus, the hair falling out. I can't lose weight. You may have some coarsening of the voice. Your skin changes. Your nails can change. It can affect your menstrual cycle. It can affect your libido. And then all of the sort of the, female hormone stuff, male hormone stuff is, the menstrual cycle for women, the, hair growing in weird places, my breasts hurt, just my migraines are off the wall. There are so many symptoms that are attributable to the hormone picture.
Yeah. Well, and you put it into some language I think everybody can understand or at least relate to. Tired and wired, foggy and frazzled. And of course, yes. You're not running from the tiger. You're sitting at your desk all day. So I
know. It just feels a little counterintuitive, right? I think this is why being able to heal the adrenals and ultimately get to exercise really helps a lot of people.
And I know people have questions about this, and I want to ask you about this as well. There's this term bioidentical. What does that mean? Bioidentical hormones and natural approaches just to supporting some of these imbalances. Talk to us kind of like, okay, we've got the symptoms. Obviously, we need to get support. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But once we get down this path, what happens in terms of bioidentical and natural approaches to support?
Yeah. So we actually obviously do a lot of testing. Are we going to get to that after this, Suzanne?
Yes. Or we could talk about that. We can do testing and then this. Okay, let's do testing first.
Let's do testing. So, because this is one of the areas where I think we have such great tools to evaluate these symptoms in great detail and actually be able to put symptoms with information. And I think that is so empowering when people see like, oh, I feel like my cortisol is off, and then they do a cortisol test, and indeed their cortisol is off, and it's like, okay, I'm not crazy, right? It feels really great to be able to capture that information. So we can test the adrenals through saliva testing. That's a cortisol test. It's done at 4 times during the day at different times, spitting in tubes, sending it to the lab, and we can plot that cortisol diurnal rhythm over a 24-hour time period. So that's the adrenals. And I think that is the best way. People often go into the doctor and they'll do a single blood test for cortisol. Unless you're looking at diagnosing Addison's or Cushing's disease, that's fairly meaningless. There are other ways to test cortisol in the traditional system using an ACTH stim test and other things, but it's a lot more cumbersome. So a saliva test can be done at home, a really easy thing to do. Hormones, so estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. Testosterone can be done off of a finger stick of blood. It can be done through a serum blood draw. It can be done through saliva. FSH and LH can be measured easily through finger stick. It actually can be done off of urine. For menstruating women, we tend to use a test called menstrual mapping, where we actually capture a first morning urine test at home every other day for an entire month. And then the patient dips a little piece of paper in that urine, collects all those papers, sends them to the lab at the end of the month. And we are plotting their entire menstrual cycle over a month, which is so helpful. Because if you're looking at like, oh, on the day 17, I had a migraine, or on day 15, I had breast tenderness, we can see exactly what estrogen and progesterone are doing. Are they where they should be? Are they flipped? Where's ovulation happening? All of that stuff can be done off of a urine test. Saliva testing for estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, a great thing to do in people who are perimenopausal and menopausal. Great way to assess where we are with hormones. And then there's another test that I do for especially for women, but it can be done in men too, called the Dutch test, where we actually look at all of the intermediary hormones between cortisol, cortisone, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. We actually layer over genomics. We see the detoxification process. It is intensely geeky and so much fun to do. And then from a thyroid perspective, finger stick test, doing a full deep thyroid panel. Please do not accept a TSH if you're symptomatic. If you're just doing a screen for thyroid, TSH is fine. But if you have symptoms that could potentially be thyroid, we need to be doing TSH, free T3, free T4, thyroid antibodies, sometimes reverse T3, iodine levels, other selenium, other things to support the thyroid so that we can understand the thyroid better. Again, can be done at home off of a finger stick test, can be done in the lab. There are lots of different ways to unpack those things. So I think the bottom line is we can understand these problems in depth, and then we can look at how you're feeling, take the data, put it together and go, aha, here's the problem. Here's where we need to focus. Sometimes it's more than one area, but here's where we need to focus.
Well, I love that because it's like this two-pronged approach. We're actually looking at the data, and you're not just looking at some one random day, you're looking at the entire picture, which totally makes sense. And then you're also looking at, okay, what are the symptoms? How do you feel? Right. And then you bring that together. So
yep.
I think that's so huge. And I'm sure people are curious, okay, where do I get tested? How do I get tested? Because if I walk into let's say my traditional doctor's office and I'm like, hey, I want these tests. Like you said, you might only get one part of it tested, or you may not get the entire picture that you really need, or the test might come back. And then
this is where so much dismissing happens in healthcare. So if you go into the doctor's office and you're fully armed with a full thyroid panel and you go, hey, I think I have thyroid problems and I want this done, you're going to get poo-pooed. Yeah, you don't need, I don't believe in T3. We'll do a TSH. So I can't tell you how many people just like beat their head up against the wall because physicians just won't cooperate with your knowledge base. And I'm telling you, this is the age of information. People are smart. My patients are smart. They teach me stuff. So we need to listen to each other, right? So where do you get this testing done? This is all in the realm of functional medicine. It's not impossible to do on your own. There are some testing companies that are consumer facing that you can actually order test kits. The problem is that this stuff tends to be really, really detailed and not easy, intuitive to understand. So having a partner, a functional medicine doctor, integrated medicine doctor, partner with you to help you understand your information. So if you go to a functional medicine physician, everything that I just talked about is our bread and butter. So you're going to find that, we're going to give you the test kits that you need to be able to do the things that you need. And it's not always the same approach. It's not going to be like, oh, every potential adrenal patient comes in and they get 1, 2, 3. No, we're going to personalize it. And it just sort of depends on your symptoms and what's going on with you that would determine which testing that you need.
That's fantastic. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about exactly what you guys do, but I do want to circle back around to this other question with this bioidentical hormones. What are those?
Yeah.
I know some people have asked about that in the past, and I'm just curious if you can share with us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Bioidenticals, I think it's a slight misnomer because they are not identical in the sense that they're not human hormones that we have spun down, synthesized into a drug and are giving other people, right? So they're not human hormones, but they are biologically similar. I think the word biosimilar hormones would probably be better. They're from natural sources. So typically they're actually mostly manufactured from yams. Who knew? Like yams produce these incredible progesterone, estrogen, estradiol, estriol. I mean, it's really great what we can do with a natural source. The thing that I really like about bioidentical hormones is that they can be customized. So we can actually create doses that are the smallest dose that you need to get symptom relief. In the traditional, talking about mostly synthetic hormones, there are some biologically equivalent prescribable hormones in the traditional world as well, but they're fixed doses. So, for example, USP progesterone, which is a great option for, progesterone that you could get at traditional pharmacy, it only comes in 2 doses. And if I need something less than that or more than that, my hands are tied. Whereas I can actually customize the bioidenticals. They can be done with capsules. You can do them in oral troches where you actually absorb the hormone through your mucous membranes. Creams is the most common, probably one of the most common ways to do it. There's actually injectables and pellets some people do. So there's a lot of ways to deliver the hormones. But yeah, they tend to be a little bit easier because again, the dose can be customized. The other thing that people don't realize is we can do the same thing with thyroid. So if you struggle with thyroid and you can't get what you need from a Synthroid or even people take T3 and T4, they take Armor, they take NP thyroid, and they're still not like, God, it's not right. We can actually build thyroid for people. Take T3, take T4, put it in whatever ratio we want. Sustained release, immediate release. We can customize it. And sometimes I have patients who I tweak by 1 microgram at a time because they're so sensitive to it. So there's so many options in the compounding world for this stuff, bioidenticals, but also other medications that can be manufactured in a very personalized way, which I think is super cool and very helpful.
Very helpful. Very helpful just hearing all this information, taking it all in. And I'm sure some people are like, I need to get tested. I want this picture. I want to hear about this. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, I know in the past people have said, well, I can't find a doctor like this in my area. You know, where does someone find a functional medicine doctor? Let's talk about that. And let's talk specifically about what Vytal Health does. Because I know for me, I had trouble finding someone in my area and I was thrilled. Not only are you in my area, but that really doesn't matter because of the approach that you take with telemedicine. Let's just dig into this a little bit further.
Yeah. So I guess this is where we insert the blatant self-promotion. Yeah. Right. So I think that because functional medicine is primarily a conversation and it needs to be an in-depth and long conversation with patients, that having a conversation this way is great. It also really puts me as a practitioner in the environment of the patient. Sometimes we actually walk over with our computers to their medicine cabinet and look at everything together. So it's a really cool way to try to deliver functional medicine consultations and care. So from the very beginning, Vytal Health, even before COVID in 2018, we launched the company. We've always been a telemedicine company. So we are everywhere. We can see patients anywhere. And that makes it a lot easier for people because if they live in a part of the state or a part of the country where there's a paucity of these types of providers, we can come to you. However, there are obviously lots of people who have bricks and mortar practices out there in Milwaukee and other places. I find that the best resource to go to for finding a functional medicine physician is on ifm.org, the Institute for Functional Medicine.org. They have a find a provider link that you can search by zip code or geography or whatever. But it's a great way for people to be able to find a physician who's either trained in functional medicine or has received some of the prerequisite training to be able to hang their virtual sort of shingle in the IFM space. So that's a really great resource for people.
Well, that's great. 2 amazing resources. You have to find someone local, but you have a place where people have been, okay, this is kind of vetted. This is where you can connect, but also, if you're open to telemedicine, it's such an, here we are all today doing this podcast actually on Zoom for those of you who can see us. And, it's great to be able to connect this way. And I know for myself, I'm so busy so that it's just so nice to be like, okay, I don't have to drive to an appointment. I can just kind of show up.
Yeah, exactly. Just drop in.
Yeah. Well, if you guys are feeling like me, I could stay and keep Dr. Mullen on the line for many more hours. So many things to dive into. Luckily, she's available to connect with further through vitalhealth.com. Dr. Mullen, I want to thank you for your time today. This was so informative as well as inspiring and just in a great conversation together.
Thank you. It's been really, really fun. You guys asked great questions, and I'm so happy to see this army of health coaches, wellness folks, people who are on their own journeys, people who are exploring this. It's really inspirational. So thank you for having me.
Thanks to everybody for listening in today, and we'll see you back here next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you for joining me for today's episode of Live Well, Dream Big. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and I want to invite you to take your next step toward living well and dreaming big by downloading the Live Well, Dream Big lifestyle book. It's the ultimate guide to becoming your best self and living life on your own terms. You can grab your complimentary copy by going to the link in the show notes or heading directly to iawpwellnesscoach.com/guide. That's iawpwellnesscoach.com/guide.